The do now for this lesson says that given that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 and angle 3 is congruent to angle 4, prove that the triangles are congruent. So I mark it up. I have angle, an angle up here, and there is a shared side. So by now you should know we're going to use reflexive, and then you can say that they are congruent by angle, side, angle. Now, another important thing that we need to know is that if two triangles are congruent, then their corresponding parts are congruent. We did this in, I think, either the first or second lesson, where when we would say that, oh, if triangle ABC was congruent to triangle DEF, then because of the order, you would know that angle A and angle D are congruent. This is the same sort of thing where we're saying that the corresponding parts are congruent. So this acronym is Cpctc. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So if you have a pair of congruent triangles and you have 2 points that correspond to each other, they must be congruent, both the distances and the angles. So in order to use this, we need to first know that the triangles are congruent. So for these proofs, we're first going to, if they tell us to prove that two segments are congruent in a pair of triangles, we first have to prove that the triangles are congruent, and then use Cpctc to say that because they are corresponding parts of congruent triangles, they must also be congruent. So for number 1, they say that AE is congruent to AB. So they have it marked. AC bisects EAB. So we're going to have a pair of congruent angles. As well as E is congruent to B. And you can also say reflexive as well. Now, if you look at the prove statement, it's different. It's asking about a set of segments. So in order to prove that EC is congruent to BC, you first have to prove that the two triangles are congruent. If they are congruent, then you can say that because the triangles are congruent, all of the distances in corresponding segments have to be the same. Therefore, these two segments are the same. So how we do that is first we start by proving the triangles are congruent. Write out the given information like we know. Number 2, my lines got a little wonky, so sorry about that. Since we know that there is a bisector, using the definition of a bisector, sorry, I thought my cat was running around, we can say that angle EAC is congruent to angle BAC. So I have a side, an angle. Oh, I did this slightly different than probably what they intended. Oh well. I forgot about these angles, so there was probably, you could have done angle, side, angle, and done it quicker. I did it slightly different. If you do it that way, it's okay. So, yes, so we have the congruent angles based off of the definition of a bisector. I saw that there was a shared side, so I used reflexive. So I have side, angle, side. Therefore, these triangles are congruent. But because my end goal is to say that EC is congruent to BC, you can see my order is messed up. The B and the C should be switched. But because these two letters are corresponding, I can say that EC is congruent to BC by corresponding parts are congruent in corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, aka Cpctc. Quite a mouthful. So for number 2, given that E is the midpoint of BC and DF. So E is the midpoint of both of these lines. So you should know, okay, I'm going to have congruent segments here, congruent segments there, and pair of intersecting lines. You know that there are vertical angles. So I can see right here, to prove that the triangles are congruent, is going to be side, angle, side. But wait, they're not asking about the triangles. They're asking about a pair of angles. They're asking about DBE and FCE. So first you have to use side, angle, side to get the triangles are congruent, and then you're going to do Cpctc to state the angles. So start with your given. State the congruent segments. BE is congruent to EC. DE is congruent to EF based off of the definition of a midpoint. State that you have vertical angles and therefore those angles are congruent. Side, angle, side to say that the triangles are congruent. Angles are congruent by Cpctc. So again, it's very similar to what we've been doing. So it's just adding on another part. So you just have to be very careful when it comes to the prove statement to make sure that if it is proving two segments or two angles, that you are taking that one extra line to put in Cpctc. So that way you are fully answering the question. So some U tries. So given that angle GKH is congruent to angle JKH, I have it marked down here, so I have a pair of congruent angles. I know that GK is congruent to JK. And I see that there's a shared side, so I have side, angle, side. But again, I look at my proof statement, I'm looking for angle. So I have to add that last line, Cpctc, in order to fully answer the question. So you use reflexive to get that last side, side, angle, side, then Cpctc to answer and finish the question. Next one, given that SV is perpendicular to WU, so I have a pair of right angles. T is the midpoint of both SV and WU. So you're going to state that there are two pairs of congruent sides. So I will have side, angle, side. Now here, again, this is where it's important to make sure you're paying attention to the proof statement. Just because we've been talking about Cpctc does not mean that every proof you do from now on is going to end with that line. They're asking about the triangles. So once I have side, angle, side, I will be able to stop. So we start with our given, state that we have right angles by definition of perpendicular. Because right angles are congruent, I have that angle that I need. I use the definition of midpoint. Why do I have that there? That should not be there. See, again, Mr. Sousa I don't think was drinking coffee. Midpoint gives us the sides. Side, angle, side gives us the triangles. I think the next page I gave you for homework. Yeah, the next page is homework, so I can do this one with you guys. So here we are going to use Cpctc because if we look at our proof statement, we're proving that two angles are congruent. They give us a pair of congruent sides and that there is a bisector, so there's a pair of congruent angles, and there's also a shared side. So write out your givens. By the definition of bisector, you're going to state that angle DGU is congruent to angle BGU. GU is congruent to GU by the reflexive. Therefore, we can use side, angle, side to state the triangles are congruent, and Cpctc to say that angle B is congruent to angle D. So here, angle B and angle D are congruent. We have another bisector, so we have another pair of congruent angles, and we have that reflexive. So we have side, angle, angle to prove that the triangles are congruent. And then we can use Cpctc to prove that the sides are congruent. So very similar. Same. The only thing that's different here is the given statement.